Hello, welcome to this live webinar, which forms a part of the HPFT IAPT Psychological Wellbeing webinar series. My name's Charlotte. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist, and I'm going to be taking the first half of this webinar, which will be a presentation on how to live with cancer during COVID pandemic. It's just giving a few pointers with regards to CBT. And then the second half of it, we're going to be having someone who's been a survivor of cancer and also has some taught experience in techniques for CBT, just to have a chat about how it was for them and what they've done. So today's webinar will focus on coping with cancer in COVID-19, and we'll be considering how to use the CBT techniques. So the webinar is going to cover understanding feelings, recognizing when you need support, tolerating uncertainty, so looking at what uncertainty is and how maybe using a few techniques will help you to tolerate it, putting some attention on routine activity and what we value, and the consequences of excessive information gathering, and what the difference is between primary and secondary suffering. Okay. So to begin with, we're going to look at primary and secondary suffering. So when you have a condition such as cancer, the obvious problem does come from your symptoms related to the diagnosis and the treatment that you receive. This can be seen as the primary suffering. However, having cancer can bring other difficulties. So, you may feel stressed, worried, you may experience low mood. Your health because of your health issues, you may stop doing the things that you would normally do, such as spending time with family and friends, and this can be made worse actually with the COVID-19 restrictions. You may not be able to see them as much as you want to. You may find that the treatments are giving you symptoms that prevent you from being able to do the things that you want to do. You may need to rest due to the side effects. All these additional difficulties can be described as secondary suffering. So some people find that secondary suffering can make their symptoms worse. For example, being stressed and worried might make the pain more intense, and so a bit of a vicious cycle develops. So in the screen, what you can see is a chap carrying a lot of pillows, and it's an analogy for the difference between primary and secondary suffering. So your cancer is like carrying around a pillow, and it makes it difficult to do your day-to-day activities. If you imagine walking around with a pillow, trying to do your day-to-day activities, it probably can be quite difficult. Now, if you imagine your secondary suffering as putting more pillows on top of that original pillow, it becomes even harder. So what we want to do in CBT is help you to let go of the additional pillows to make your day a little bit easier. Looking at the example above, you can see how central is the primary suffering, cancer symptoms, and the impact of treatment. So this person is suffering primarily because they do have cancer symptoms, and they do have symptoms which are as a result of their treatment. Now, the secondary suffering is the stuff that goes on around that. So we can't change the primary suffering, but we can maybe change the secondary suffering. So in this particular example, the person is thinking, why do I feel like this? How bad will I feel today? I don't want to let people down. I can't do what I used to be able to do. These sorts can lead to feelings of feeling low, frustrated, guilty. If we think and feel this way, we almost can experience symptoms associated with that, such as irritability, fatigue, palpitations, irritation, headaches. And when we have these physical sensations, it's understandable why we might choose to withdraw from activities altogether, or be driven to try and do more to overcome them. And it can lead to a bit of a vicious cycle if we do engage with unhelpful behaviours. So, for example, if you're invited to a party and you think, I don't want to let people down, You may feel frustrated with yourself. You may feel guilty, and you may notice physical sensations as a result of that. And so, because you don't want to let people down, you might decide to go anyway, pushing it too hard. And that can have a severe consequence on how you feel the next few days. And then the next time an invitation to a party comes up. So these examples of secondary suffering can really impact on you. So say, for example, the next time you may think, you know what, last time I went, I tried really hard, and the next few days I was floored. So I don't think I can go this time. You might withdraw completely. And as a result, you might feel more isolated. Secondary suffering could include spending a lot of time thinking about how your diagnosis and your treatment might impact on those around you. Perhaps it could lead you to avoiding to speaking to people about cancer, your loved ones, your friends. You may have thoughts about not wanting to burden them, not wanting them to feel concerned or worried. And the consequences of that could lead to you feeling isolated and alone, coping with a condition, and that might make you feel more anxious about, not knowing what to expect, not knowing how to react. So whilst we're not able to eliminate the primary suffering associated with what you're going through with your diagnosis of cancer, being aware of your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviours, which can contribute to the secondary suffering, can be looked at, and we can do something about this so that we can try to reduce the secondary suffering as a result. So, first of all, when being diagnosed with a life-threatening illness such as cancer, the way we think about the situation can lead us to view ourselves, the future, other people in a certain way. And when this happens, how we approach things can be altered. So firstly, let me say, it's completely understandable to be preoccupied and to be anxious, to feel hopeless and defeated when we're given a diagnosis of cancer. And if you do identify with this, then you can understand why you might do some of the things such as avoiding or staying away from certain situations. How you view your diagnosis can make all the difference in how you respond. If you see yourself as someone who can control their life in some aspects, even if it's just how you control your response to bad news, then you're more likely to do things that help you to alleviate some of your symptoms. If you see yourself though as someone who doesn't respond well to threats, if you see your situation of diagnosis as a threat, you might spend your time being preoccupied and anxious or feeling helpless and hopeless. And when we feel that way, it can be hard to then act upon something that's going to make us potentially happier or potentially live the life that we want to live, how we can live it. So if you do think that you are of the latter, this could be an example of that secondary suffering. And first step is to be aware that this is what's happening for you, so that you can take change if you want to. Okay, so when we're given bad news, it's understandable to feel overwhelmed and untethered from the life that we thought we were living. Routine activities that we normally engage with that gave us a sense of coping and a sense of well-being can go out the window. We're all reacting differently to bad news at the moment with regards to COVID-19, and how we react is fine. It's up to you how you cope with situations. It's completely personal. But in CBT, what we mean by coping is how we define ourselves in a way to get through the day, how we get through the day in the way that we want to. So it kind of links with your values. So considering a balance between activities of which we have a sense of achievement, closeness, and enjoyment is really helpful for our well-being. If you have too many of difficult tasks in one day, what you can find is that your energy levels and your mood can be impacted as a result of it. So it is important to make sure that you are getting the balance of achievement activities, closest activities, and enjoyment activities that aren't too difficult. So if you do have one difficult task to do in a day, see if you can balance that out with some tasks that perhaps are not too strenuous as a result, or perhaps do something to nourish your physical or your mental well-being instead of another difficult task. For example, if you have an appointment or a treatment that you've got planned, consider what will you do after this to care for yourself. Will it be planning time to rest or arranging time to speak to a friend or a family member after treatment? Whatever you think is going to be most helpful to you is the right thing to do. As I say, it is personal to you. If you have planned activities in advance, this can help you to feel motivated to engage in them. Often telling someone you're going to do something can help you to engage. But again, if your primary suffering means that your symptoms have flared up and you need to take time to rest, don't feel too roped into having to do something just because you've agreed to it. Know what your body needs and react to what your body needs. Cancer treatment can often lead people to feeling exhausted, and it will be important to know when you do need to rest. So please do listen to your body. So what do we mean by values? I mentioned values a little bit earlier. So your values are personal to you. They change from time to time depending on, how you've been brought up and what's important to you in your life. So, you may, before being given a diagnosis of cancer, not have valued your health and well-being as much, whereas now that might be something that you think is more important to you. So values are things that are important to you that continue to go on in your life. Very different from goals, which once we've achieved them, they're done. Values are consistent. So it might be that you value friendship, and you might have been someone who was constantly going out and seeing friends and being really busy, whereas now, because of your primary suffering, your symptoms of cancer, you might find that you don't have the energy levels to do what you used to do. So how can you live your life with the value of friendship still, given what you're going through? Can you make small changes so that you can still feel as though you are engaging with that value of friendship? Can you accept the help of a friend who says, "I'll come over and make some meals"? Can you do a Zoom chat instead? Can you perhaps, rather than going for that jog that you might have done once upon a time with your friend before the treatment, could you maybe go for a walk and sit on a bench together, socially distanced, of course, and find that way of communicating still? So with everything, balance is key. If you find that you're becoming exhausted and tired, maybe have a look at what activities have you been engaging in? Are these consistent with your values? Is there any way you would prefer? Is there other areas that you might prefer to engage with instead? So living with cancer in uncertain times, it might feel overwhelming. You could be facing delays due to the response of information regarding treatments and appointments, which can cause stress. One of the biggest uncertainties people face with cancer can be knowing if treatment will work or not, knowing how helpful treatment's going to be. The COVID pandemic may also have been impacting on the waiting times or access and support with COVID, and uncertainty might be, because of the uncertainty, might be more difficult because of the waiting times. So human beings, we prefer things to be predictable. Our brains are wired to be alert to threats. Periods of uncertainty can feel threatening. Consider how we manage the sense of threat can be important in learning how we cope with such difficult situations. If we continue to strive for certainty, it can make us feel more anxious. Part of coping with cancer during COVID might be seeing the benefit of letting go of some of these things that we can't control. So this could be recognizing what is and what is not within our control. if we are exhausted, if we've exhausted all the things that we can do, if we've looked at everything that's within our control, then, and there's nothing further we can do, then it might be worth letting go of continuing to think about it until there is something else that we can do. Okay. So how do we learn to tolerate this feeling of being uncertain? Because, you know, it's easier to say, isn't it? Oh, you know, you can't do anything about it, and also to just let go of it. But how do we do that? So in order to expand our tolerance of feeling uncertain, it might be helpful to recognize the thoughts and the urges that we tend to engage with when we are seeking certainty about something. So for some people, when they're trying to be certain, they do a lot of approach behaviours. So that might be checking the news, reassurance seeking from partners and friends. It may be going to see multiple doctors and getting different types of advice, endlessly searching online for information. And for other people, it could be the opposite. It could be that they avoid action. It could be that they put things off or don't do them entirely. That might mean, for example, not contacting medical professionals when they need to, not attending their appointments, steering away from conversations that might make them feel uncertain, such as the diagnosis of cancer and what the treatment outcomes are going to be. So depending on how you approach the situation will be what you might need to do differently to change how you feel and how you tolerate uncertainty. So if you, have previously engaged in a lot of approach behaviours, perhaps you could sit with the discomfort that comes from being uncertain without the excessive checking, without the, reassurance seeking and gaining of information. And through doing this, through practicing this, hopefully you'll start to develop a tolerance for that uncertainty. Same with avoidance behaviours. If your normal response is to avoid things entirely, perhaps you can see what it feels like when you do attempt to find out a little bit more information by going to your appointments, by speaking to family and friends. So as previously discussed, limiting the amount of information you seek can reduce the feelings of being overwhelmed. So focusing on information from reliable sources rather than searching for long periods of time online can be helpful. Ask yourself, is the amount of time spent online looking for sources of information taking me away from my day-to-day activities? Is this something that I value in terms of the what I'm doing with my time? Where else would I like to spend my time instead? Another way to manage uncertainty is to refocus your attention. So think about where is my attention at the minute? What am I noticing my attention is on? Is my attention on my cancer diagnosis, on how people might treat me or think about me? If it is, what was I doing just before that thought came into my mind? Can I reattend to that? Can I put my attention back onto what I was thinking before I started to worry or feel uncertain about the thought? By refocusing your attention, hopefully what you'll notice is you'll get better and better at that, so it'll get easier to do. Another thing that might be helpful is mindfulness or relaxation skills as a way to refocus your attention. So there are plenty of different types of mindfulness meditations. You can find more on our HPFT website if you want, and there's a variety of apps as well. So I think that brings us to the general advice of CBT approach to dealing with cancer during COVID. What we're going to do now is we're going to invite Jo to the chat, to this discussion. So we're going to have a little talk about how to, use Jo's lived experience and her knowledge in CBT to see if there's a way in which we can get any information that might help us to further deal with the uncertainty that we're facing at the minute with cancer during COVID. So if I could just invite Joe to the chat, that's okay.
Hi, Charlotte.
Hi, Joe. So I hope you've been listening to that, and maybe you can pick up on anything that I might have missed out. But so can you perhaps start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I'm a therapist on the same team as Charlotte. I'm also a cancer survivor, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. I'd like to talk a little bit about the lived experience of having a cancer diagnosis, and how I use the tools and techniques that Charlotte's just been talking about to get through. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about what the impact of COVID has been on the way I've progressed. So very briefly, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in November of 2018 after a routine scan in the Sainsbury's car park. And any woman over 50 living locally to Watford will know exactly where I mean. I had surgery the following month in December of 2018 and radiotherapy in the spring of 2019. And I still take endocrine therapy and attend regular checkups a couple of times a year.
Okay. Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm not familiar with that area of where you live, but I was wondering, could you tell us about the emotional experience of getting that diagnosis?
Yeah, it's a very slow process. In fact, diagnosis can take place over several stages, which is a direct pathway to uncertainty. So there's an initial scan, which might come back with the result that there's a suspicious finding with no real clarity about what that might be. You'd then be invited to go for a more detailed scan and possibly a biopsy where a sort of physical sample of tissue is removed, which is like a minor operation in itself. And then you might need some dye injected to make whatever's been detected look more visible or more easily discernible to the surgeon. You still may not know exactly what's going on until after surgery. So once you've had surgery, then there's analysis of the actual tissue that's been removed and of the margins of your own tissue where the tumour has been, to check for that they've all been removed. So what I'm saying is there's actually several appointments. There's a series of appointments before any clear diagnosis can be given. You can get a very high level diagnosis that this looks like it might be cancer, but until we've done all these tests and subsequent scans, we can't know exactly whether it is or what type it is or how serious it is, how advanced it is, what grade it is. There's lots of different aspects to that process of diagnosis, which can go on for weeks, because between each appointment is at least a week and often longer, and that's on quite a rapid pathway. So the information accumulates very slowly and is all generally very new and very unfamiliar and difficult to process. So throughout this period, I was in a state of extreme uncertainty, experiencing endless negative, catastrophic thoughts. I felt very helpless. I felt completely out of control, and often that I had become nothing more than just another patient.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, Joe, that sounds like, that was really difficult for you. And I can imagine that people who may be experiencing those wait times at the minute during COVID, it's probably, even harder, even longer. So what strategies did you use then to manage this kind of waiting time that you had to do?
Yeah, it takes a while to figure out what's the best way to handle such difficult waiting times, and I've considered myself really lucky that I've got this kind of CBT background, that I do have these tools to draw on. I think, like many patients who've been down this path, I have enormous respect and admiration for the NHS oncology team who looked after me, and in fact, they were extremely aware of how difficult these early stages can be for all cancer patients. So I think their response to me, their attitude towards me, quickly helped me feel less like, just another patient. They knew my name, and I felt very well looked after. I think a good strategy is to try and engage with your nursing team. So I think, like most cancer patients, I was allocated a Macmillan nurse, whose name was Sarah, whose role was always to be available to answer any questions I had, explain procedures, provide reassurance, because it's not always possible to get in touch with doctors directly. I was able to reach out to Sarah whenever I wanted to, and she said she would always get back to me within 24 hours, which she absolutely did. Now, I think it's on me, but I was quite reluctant to do this at first. I was fairly confident that I would be capable of managing the situation myself. I would find the information I needed without help, and I would just generally be able to cope. What I soon discovered is that cancer is a very diverse condition, with many different types, even within the breast cancer subset, which means that information is very particular to one person. And so what's true for me or works for me won't necessarily be true or work for somebody else. So, you quickly discover that it's actually very misleading to try and survive on Google or general information, or even to talk to friends, even when they're well-meaning, and other cancer patients, even when they seem to be very like you. So I eventually had to start doing that. Admit that I couldn't cope completely by myself, and go to Sarah and say, I have these questions. This is what's bothering me. This is how I'm worried. And as a CBT therapist, looking at the tools we've just been talking about, I think I definitely had an unhelpful belief that, if I could put it like that, that I can cope on my own. I can cope. Once I did begin to call Sarah to clarify some details, or just tell her I was worried about or thinking a lot about a particular issue, my experience was transformed. She was able to explain in detail why certain decisions had been made about my treatment, why some aspects of treatment had been offered or others had not been offered. If I wasn't quite sure what the upcoming appointment was about, she was able to tell me. And she was able to give me information about when test results were coming in, when lab results would be available, and she would call and remind me and set up appointments for me. So once I accepted that I couldn't completely cope on my own, I felt a great deal better. I had much better information to manage my own uncertainty, and that sort of helped me modify that belief to something more like, although I can cope with a lot of this, I do much better when I share my concerns and allow myself to be helped by informed others, such as the Macmillan nurses. And it wasn't until later, after the surgery and then the subsequent lab analysis, that I began to get the actual specific medical information about the grade and severity of my cancer, and the degree to which the surgery had been able to help me.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that, Jo. Wow, I mean, I think that's really interesting because, if we look at the way we see ourselves for coping, sometimes we see it as either we cope or we don't cope. And what I really liked about what you said there was, you reflected that there are many areas in which you cope really well by yourself. This was one of those areas that perhaps it was okay to let other people help you to cope with that, because you didn't have all the information, and there were people who had expertise, and it seemed like that was a real turning point for you. So it sounds as though you went through quite a lot of uncertainty with the cancer treatment. How did you cope with that?
Yeah, it's overwhelming, and I think that's probably true. I don't want to speak for other patients, but I think just the nature of the disease and the time it takes to figure out what's going on means that uncertainty is a huge part of having this illness and ploughing through treatment. It can be overwhelming. I think people respond in different ways and find different strategies. So I don't want to say that my way was the right way or the best way, but certainly there were things that I found that were more helpful to managing that uncertainty. My best antidote to uncertainty was to get hold of high quality information. What I mean by that was I actually cut down on the type and quantity of information I was looking for. I became much more selective about what I read and who I talked to and what kind of questions I asked. And I pretty much stopped Googling altogether unless I had very specific, accurate medical terminology. So that kind of cut down a lot of my uncertainty, but by just avoiding all the kind of yes, but, and what if, and how does that work. We talked a little bit earlier, Charlotte, about the thinking styles and how that can impact on the way you see yourself. And I was able to notice certain things about myself that explain that. So, for instance, I was definitely catastrophizing from the first letter that said you need to come back. You need to come back for another scan. My immediate response to that was, "Whoa, I'm going to be dead before Christmas." So within a month, and it kind of flashed up and went away, that thought, but it was there. So I challenged that by talking directly to the oncologist. I said, am I going to die? And he said that based on what he already knew, which wasn't a great deal at that time, but based on the grade and stage of the tumour, I was not going to die. I was not going to die within that month, or likely any time soon. So that was extremely reassuring. I did some black and white thinking. I think, like a lot of people, I suppose, I've been brought up to see cancer as kind of equivalent to dying, a terminal diagnosis at every time. And it's not until you really inspect your own beliefs that you realise you hold that kind of belief. As I educated myself, I learned that that's really not true anymore. It's not been true for a long time, and it's becoming less true every year. There's a huge amount of progress being made in treatment for all kinds of cancers, and certainly breast cancer is one of the ones where huge advances have been made. So for my condition, it was simply the black and white extreme was simply wrong and misleading. The other thing I noticed was that I became very sensitive to news stories about mainly celebrities. Obituaries and death announcements, and I wanted to know what had caused those deaths. And at the same time, I don't know if you remember him, the MP Paddy Ashdown announced his own cancer diagnosis at about the same time as me, but he died within 4 weeks of that diagnosis, unfortunately, which I found terrifying. I did explore that and later learned he had a very different cancer, diagnosed very late. So there was actually no real advantage to comparing the two or seeing them in any way similar. They're extremely different situations. So I was able to limit. So after that, I limited my access to news and media. What else? I tried to be kind to myself. I think also good CBT advice. I didn't think about work. I tried to relax my expectations of myself. I did less housework. I watched more movies. I did silly things. I bought pink fluffy socks. I tried out lots of different teas, that expensive posh tea in pretty little tins, things like that. Just to feel I had some control over small pleasurable things, day-to-day life. And I think much more slowly I allowed other people in to help me. I'm not a big social media user, so I didn't use that much to sort of update people. I contacted people on an individual basis. I do know that a lot of people found social media helpful to reach out, to talk about what they were doing, and to talk to other people in the same situation. I think so. It's probably something you need to decide for yourself, what suits you, what works for you. There is no wrong or right way, as long as you're moving in a direction that allows friends and family to offer that support, even if it's just a "How are you?" WhatsApp once a month.
Yeah, definitely. And do you know what I really liked about that, Joe, is you talked about what you were doing that was potentially making your uncertainty worse, such as the catastrophic thinking, the overgeneralization of comparing yourself to someone else who died very recently from cancer around the same time as being diagnosed. That black and white thinking as well. And you identified that was causing you more uncertainty, which I think helped you to then choose to, unhook from that kind of behaviour. And by redirecting your attention onto what you've also seen as more helpful behaviours to tolerate uncertainty. So, reaching out to your friends, doing those kind gestures towards yourself. I really like the idea of the tea. That sounds kind of pink fluffy socks. That sounds great. So I'm a bit curious. What's been the impact of COVID on your experience, and how has the pandemic affected you as a cancer patient?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm quite lucky in the sense that the bulk of my treatment was completed before the pandemic, so I'm lucky in that respect, and I haven't had to experience the delays in those very early diagnostic appointments that we're hearing about now. I must say, if I were in that situation now, I think the only meaningful response would be to try and stay in contact with my GP or those early diagnosis teams and press for referral and treatment as soon as possible. But undoubtedly that gap in services has been the most difficult aspect of the pandemic for many people, and it's resolving, but slowly. Even so, despite that, I'm not completely unaffected. Although I finished the main treatment, I will not be discharged from the care of the breast clinic for 5 years. So I do have regular appointments, which have been affected by COVID. They've either been completely delayed by weeks, or they've been converted to telephone appointments, which is okay. But I'm thinking of a situation I had recently where I developed some severe pain in my shoulder on the same side as I'd had the surgery. I had to actually wait several months before I could talk to anyone about that. And I had that concern in the back of my mind that it might be connected with my surgery, or it might be a recurrence of the original cancer, which is entirely possible. When I finally did get a phone appointment with my oncologist, it was on the telephone, so he was unable to properly examine the pain or my range of movement. So I ended up having to request imaging, so X-rays and scans, etc., to explore this in more depth. Again, another frightening time, to having to go into hospitals at the time where lockdown was pretty hard, where everyone was learning about wearing masks, and the whole situation really felt very frightening. So again, I learned to lean on the people around me, my family, my friends, and of course Sarah, my Macmillan nurse. I did a lot of Googling with no real outcome, because shoulder pain is a very vague term, and given my situation, the news was not looking good. I ended up planning the letters I was going to write. If I was given bad news, I actually began to think about those things, which is a bit morbid. So in the end, I was, after my scans and being able to talk to a physiotherapist, I was diagnosed with something called adhesive capsulitis, which you might know more commonly as frozen shoulder It's a very common condition. It's very painful and it's quite chronic, but it sorts itself out in the end, and no serious treatment is necessary. It's also completely unrelated to cancer. So I can live with that because it's not cancer. And I'm still having physiotherapy for it, but I know that I will recover.
Yeah. Do you know what was really, I'm so glad that actually, you know, it has nothing to do with your cancer, and I completely understand why, you know, you wanted to engage with the Google and the letters again. And, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because as CBT therapists, we often think, oh, you know, we know what we're doing, and so therefore we're just going to be able to respond perfectly every time. But at the end of the day, we're all human, and even people who are, you know, experts at using these techniques can sometimes find it difficult. So I guess, you know, what's really important here is to be kind to yourself when you notice that you are perhaps engaging with an unhelpful behaviour that you know probably in the long run it's not going to help you in the short run. You know, you find it difficult to not attend to. So what's your mood outlook like now? You know, how do you feel today in relation to, you know, how you when you first got the diagnosis to now?
Well, you know, luckily for me, I'm here today. I'm well. I'm back at work. So, you know, I have much to be grateful for and much to be positive about. You know, a lot of that's down to the medical treatment I received from the NHS, which is one of the best breast cancer recovery pathways in the world. It's accessible, it's fast, and it's effective. And however bad it's been, I'm hugely grateful to, you know, live in a country that has access to that kind of treatment. Apart from the medical aspects of it, a big part of my recovery has been emotional and mental, psychological, and this has been made easier with the tools that we're talking about today. I mean, with the support of the people around me at work and the tools and techniques that we've just been discussing, that I have training in, I did feel like getting through diagnosis and treatment and all those uncertainties was more manageable. You know, it doesn't eliminate them, but it does give you a way to get through the days and a way to make a plan and a way to manage those really uncomfortable emotions. So whilst you can't get rid of those, you know, feeling frightened or worried, anxious, you know, I probably did a lot of crying in those early days, but I can say that the experience changed my life, and I do continue to experience unexpected new feelings in some situations, which, you know, I allow. I'm a different person now. I've been through something quite dramatic that many others are going through now.
Yeah, it sounds as though you've really made room for experiencing all of the emotions that come when having a diagnosis of cancer, having treatment and being in recovery, and, you know, any kind of physical sensations, symptoms that might come afterwards. And, you know, you have been on quite a roller coaster, really, haven't you? And I was wondering if you got any kind of like last tips you can offer any clients that may be watching this who may be going through cancer in this time.
Yeah, sure. I think you know, for me, after all the various treatments I've been through, I've been given information by the surgeons that the cancer was removed and my prognosis is now pretty good. I think what's important to bear in mind, whatever type of cancer you have and wherever you are, is that you can never say never, that we're all on a spectrum of uncertainty. Even though I've been lucky, it doesn't mean I'm done with cancer or I will never get it again. And the certainty I have is the most certainty I can expect. So I think recognizing that we can get some certainty about likelihood of disease returning or getting worse or getting better. It can vary, but it's never 100%. And from now on in, we're all living with uncertainty. because there are no guarantees, all any of us can do is try and manage those small things that are within our control. So things like keeping a track of your own way of thinking, whether you're catastrophizing, coming up with lots of scary thoughts. Go to appointments. Don't skip them. Make them a priority. Make sure you attend. Talk to people. Talk to the people who know you and your medical history. And of course, with a condition like cancer, there's various lifestyle management things we can all do, but they're not generally enormously different to what we're told anyway. Eat right, don't smoke, exercise, those kinds of things. So trying to build those in is also a good way to manage that uncertainty. It's a common condition now. I think something like half of us are likely to be in this situation at some point in our lives. But it doesn't mean the end. There's lots of changes and developments. So, find out what's relevant to you and your particular diagnosis, and don't avoid things or try and deny them. I think there's no doubt that COVID is making everything worse, and I don't have an easy answer to that. At the time of this conversation, which is in our third lockdown now, all I can do is encourage anyone who has any worries or symptoms to get in touch with your GP. I'm finding GPs have become very skilled at dealing with the medical consultations online or via video, in a way that is going to catch anything you're concerned about. And there's no need to think I don't want to bother anyone, or I'm sure it's nothing, it'll go away. Do come forward, do speak to somebody, and try and get those symptoms on a list somewhere. On a queue for referral for assessment. The NHS as a whole, I think, now acknowledges that although we have this hugely pressured focus on COVID, we still need to carry on with other treatments. So make sure you get yourself checked out.
Thank you for that, Jo. And you're also right when you say that. I think there is a common thing that I've heard people say: I don't want to bother people, I don't want to bother the NHS doctors, etc. during COVID times. But actually, GPs want you to bother them. They want you to approach them, and because it's going to be a bigger problem in the long run. So please do, like Jo said, please do make sure you go and visit your GP and get things checked out. So thank you for that, Jo. We're going to carry on just summarising the rest of these slides now, and then that'll be the end of the presentation. So just in summary, so talking about some of the things that we've looked at today. Today we've discussed understanding your thinking and your feelings around COVID and cancer. And it can be very helpful to do this in identifying your own personal experiences, which can impact on low mood and anxiety. So anxiety and low mood is completely understandable when going through a diagnosis of cancer during COVID times. And it can have an impact on your functioning day to day, and these thoughts and these feelings arise. So it's important to notice what secondary symptoms are, or the secondary suffering, as we've called it earlier. As by identifying these, we can perhaps make some changes that might make us feel a little bit better, alleviate some of those secondary issues. So COVID has impacted the way in which we treat cancer, unfortunately, at the minute, but hopefully things are starting to get a bit better. Appointments are starting to become more on time and on track as we're learning to kind of adapt to COVID. So, all of these things may be contributing to you feeling uncertain, and having so much uncertainty to manage can be distressing. And, as you know, during the pandemic, there has been a few absences in treatment, but hopefully, as I say, we'll get them back on track with that. Searching for information, though, can sometimes feel like the right thing to do, but actually, we can spend lots of time doing this and never get the answer that we want if the answer isn't out there. So I know it might be frustrating not having the answer, but perhaps it's about putting your attention on something that will make your day a bit better instead, rather than looking for any kind of information which may be inaccurate. What we do know that helps is learning to tolerate feeling uncertain, making room for uncomfortable physical sensations when uncertainty arises. Some of the ways which we can do this are some of the ways in which Joe has described, such as the mindfulness, such as the tolerance of uncertainty by redirecting your attention and spending time with family and friends, doing things that are kind for yourself. Maybe getting yourself pink fluffy socks. I love that idea. Having an awareness of how we may be experiencing secondary suffering through how we're thinking and responding can be useful to identify changes, which may help us let go of some of these perceptions and expectations which are weighing us down. So attending to your values, attending to routine activities that is balanced with pleasurable closeness and achievement can help us to redirect that attention away from secondary suffering and intolerance of uncertainty. So, if you need more urgent care, please do use the services that are most appropriate, which would be the NHS number 111 option 2. Or you could call the the Samaritans on 116123, which is 24 hours a day. And I'd also recommend you having a chat with your GP. So thank you for watching this presentation and Q&A with myself and Joe. If you live in Hertfordshire or the north of Essex, you can access additional self-help information materials or more on this by looking at www.hpft-iap.co.uk. If you live outside of Hertfordshire and North Essex, you can contact the local IAPT service for additional support information by looking at the link on the page here, which is www.nhs.uk/service/find a psychological therapy service. Also, you may find that if you just want to find out a few of the more of the webinars, you can look at the YouTube channel, which has a series of mini self-help videos. So if you put in the search drive HPFT IAPT psychological wellbeing webinars, that should come up. Thank you for listening today.